Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show with your host, Phil Tarrant.
G'day everyone. A bit of a theme running on the Smart Property Investment Show, and that is us flying the flag for sensibility in property investment and not stupidity. I talk about stupidity being a lot of the media rattling sabres or whatever else around how we're in dire straits with property price at the moment. Everyone's going to blow their dough and Australia's going to end destitute with a 40% reduction in property values. If you've been living on a rock, you probably haven't heard about this, but if you switch on the TV or look at the newspaper or anything on the internet, I'm sure you've seen something around this, and it's got a lot of people scared, rightfully. Property is Australia's biggest asset class, is where Australians hold the majority of their wealth. It is the backbone in many ways of our banking system, and our banks are some of the strongest in the world. It's pretty important to the national economy, the health of the economy, and how we progress as a nation. So rightfully, when someone starts talking about 40% reductions in property prices, it gets everyone concerned. So my view of it, and if you've been tuning into this, you've got to understand and appreciate where you're getting information from. There is many, many markets right across Australia. Everyone's getting pulled into the Sydney and Melbourne markets, and this is where a lot of the noise around price reductions is coming in. Yes, there is a softening in the market, but there's a normalisation in many ways of property markets in those states. But I am not qualified to talk about this because I'm just a humble journalist with what is often seen to be a mediocre opinion. So my job is to actually talk to people who know what they're talking about and hopefully sort of extract information out of them and curate those ideas to share with you so we can all make more informed property investment decisions. So today I've got someone who's going to help me out with this, Peter Koulizos. You might know Peter, and if you ever tune into Sky TV, I've been on the telly with him before talking about property on Your Money, Your Call. So I know Peter. He's also the chairman of the Property Investment Professionals Australia, which is the peak body for people working across property in Australia. And that includes buyers agents, brokers, real estate agents, accountants, anyone that touches the property transaction. Peter's here. We're going to chat about the market and whatever else we think about. Peter, how you going, mate?
Oh, very good indeed, Phil. Thank you very much for the invitation.
So are we all going to go broke as a nation and we're all done and dusted? It's all over?
No, mate. But it's got everyone talking about it, hasn't it?
It has, hasn't it?
And it was interesting. Almost 10 years to the day, 60 Minutes did a very similar story straight after the GFC hit Australia. And I don't know if you remember, but Associate Professor Steve Keen came on the TV.
One of the most hated men in property in Australia.
Famously said property prices in Sydney would drop 40%. Now, I admire him partly because he truly believed that. So he sold his place in Sydney, and I think he got a job in some university in England. But in the meantime, the poor bugger missed out on Sydney property prices doubling in that time. I know that they've dropped about 5% in the last year or so, but that's still an increase of around 95%. So the poor bugger got that really, really wrong. And even though it makes great headlines for property prices to drop by 40%, there is no way in the world that's going to happen, because three things would need to happen for property prices to plunge. One, interest rates would have to be really high. Two, unemployment would have to be really high, and the banks would have to stop lending money. Interest rates are historical lows. Unemployment is very low. And yes, it is harder to borrow money. I will concede that. But it's not like they have stopped lending to either property investors or to buyers. So there is no way that is going to happen. I would love to have a bet, just like Steve Keen did 10 years ago with somebody else and he lost it. I would love to have a bet.
He had to walk to the top of Koulizos.
He did. That's right. Yeah. I'd love to have a bet with him and say, look, if you lose, you do this, and if I lose, I'll do whatever it might be.
Well, if you're tuning in, let's make this bet. So you're ready to take any bets on? All right.
Yeah.
So Peter's qualified to chat about this, as well as chairing PIPA, Property Investment Professionals Australia, and that is a body of like-minded professionals that work within property investment. I sit on the board of that, and I come from the media side of things. Everyone else is a property investment professional. I'm not, but hopefully add some value to it.
You certainly do, Phil.
Well, I hope so.
Don't underrate yourself, mate.
The voice of reason and sensibility, no doubt. But Peter is a lecturer that works across property economics, valuation, development with University of South Australia, and you're also at the TAFE doing a course for people who want to make money in property rather than trying to get a Cert 4. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you know what you're talking about.
Plus, I have a graduate diploma in property, a Master of Business in Property, a Masters of Urban and Regional Planning, a teaching degree, but most importantly, I actually invest in property too.
Okay, so they're all the big ones, right? So you're doing it yourself.
That's right.
And you've got lots of degrees around it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I know the theory,
Yeah.
and I put the theory into practice.
What's the last best thing you've learned about property?
Well,
You know, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
What's the last big idea that you got? Shit, I should have known that.
I wrote a book 10 years ago on the best suburbs to invest in. So now I'm analysing how good or bad my forecasts were. And there are 3 things that have been reinforced. So I'm like learning it again because this is the sort of stuff that I teach in class. Number 1, houses are better than units for capital growth.
Yep.
And this is and I selected over 100 suburbs within Australia. So it's a random sample, all right? Houses are better than units. Suburbs close to the city do better than others. But most importantly, you want to pick the right city. So it's great to pick the right type of house, which is generally an older style house, in the right street, in the right suburb, but you need to get the right city. Because what I did was I picked 20 suburbs in the major capital cities and a handful of suburbs in like Hobart, Canberra and Darwin. And what I found was my best performing suburbs, so the number 1 suburb over the last 10 years in Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth, Canberra or Hobart, were nowhere near what the number 20 suburb did in Sydney.
In capital growth?
In capital growth.
As a percentage or absolute value?
As a percentage.
Okay.
As a percentage.
Really? As a percentage?
Yeah. So in Sydney, out of the 20 that I picked, they all did more than 100%.
Okay.
But the best out of those other 5 capital cities that I mentioned were 50%.
So the city being the capital city? Okay.
Yeah. So, and similar for Melbourne, because Sydney and Melbourne did similar capital growth over the last period of time. But hindsight is a wonderful thing, all right? But one thing we do know is, like everything else in the economy, it moves in cycles. So one would imagine, this is generally speaking, because I'm sure there are pockets that are going to do better than others everywhere. The next 10 years for Sydney and Melbourne won't be as good as the last 10 years. But the next 10 years for Adelaide and Brisbane should be better than they were for the last 10 years. And this is based on decades of data based on property price growth in Australia.
Okay. So if you bought in Sydney in the last 10 years, you've done well.
Oh, mate. Median house price was $500,000. Now it's $1 million.
So this goes
Not
down.
bad.
So back to our chat then, and this is connected. So, you know, you're talking about some suburbs property doubling Sydney in the last 10 years. And, you know, I've seen that in my portfolio. You know, we were really smart and also really lucky to invest in Sydney at the right time. And we've seen most of our stuff double in value, some of it even more, like 130, 140%.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Great. You know, we bought well, we bought the right stuff, all the things you spoke about, we did all that, right? Great. Sydney's not going to be doing that. It's not going to grow at the same rate as what it has done over the last decade. Will it grow again at the same rate at some point in the future?
Yeah. And look, we all go nuts over the last 10 years in Sydney, but back in the late 80s, Sydney had a much bigger property boom.
So no one talks about this.
No. So I think from memory, it was like 1988, 1989. In those 2 years, Sydney property prices increased by more than 30% in each of those years.
Like compounding every 30%.
So that's in over 2 years, it grew by more than 60%. Now, that's something to write home about. Whereas, you know, the growth that we've had in the last 10 years is above average, but nowhere near as good as it has been in Sydney in the past, or nowhere near as good as it was in Perth back in 2006, where property prices increased by 45% in 1 year. Hobart in the early 2000s, property prices increased by 55% in 1 year. Certainly these are remarkable, but what's happened in Sydney and Melbourne, I think is remarkable given that it's happened straight after the GFC. You know, the rest of the world hasn't done very well, economy-wise, property-wise, but Australia, during that period, now holds the record for the country with the longest period of time without going into recession.
Okay.
So you were saying before in the introduction, you know, our banks are some of the strongest in the world, and we have them to thank in part for the way our economy is going at the moment.
That's a fair point. So why isn't property 40% overvalued? And to be fair to that, we're talking about the 6 Minute Report, and you had some people on there, including Louis Christopher from SQM, and he's subsequent to that report come out with some coverage himself, saying pretty much that what he said has been misconstrued, right? I don't think he's particularly happy with how that was presented. I think he did a very, very long interview and only a very, very small part of it, which lent itself to painting a particular picture that 60 Minutes wanted to paint a picture of, made it to air. So we're going to get Louis in at some point, hopefully. Louis, if you're listening in, I'm sure the guys will be in touch. I want to hear what you say because, you know, you know what you're talking about. I don't think it's very productive for anyone for reports like that going out because it just really concerns people. But you're saying unequivocally is that property isn't going to drop by 40% in Sydney and Melbourne. It's
not going to drop by 40% anywhere in our capital cities.
Okay.
There is one proviso. While I was doing that research on suburbs in the last 10 years, Tim Lawless from CoreLogic kindly sent me all the data for all the suburbs and towns in Australia over the last 10 years. Yeah. I was only looking for my 107, but he sent it all to me. So while I was sitting in front of the computer and I needed a break, I thought I'll just list these suburbs and towns in order from the towns that have dropped the most value to the towns that have increased the highest. And maybe not surprisingly, there was a huge amount of mining towns where property prices dropped significantly. Like for memory, there were some in Western Australia in that 10-year period had dropped by 70%. Dropped by 70%. The rest of Australia has gone up. Yeah. They've dropped by 70%. So that was, again, another lesson learned. You asked me what's the latest thing that I've learned in property. For me, it's just been reinforced. It's fine to invest in regional and rural areas, but you need to find areas that are driven by more than one thing in the economy. Yeah. Mining towns are generally driven by mining. But if you can go into an area that might have mining and education, such as a university and hospital for health, then that's great. It's got a number of different capital growth drivers.
Yeah, and there's some very good regional locations, which are very attractive at the moment. I know we have people that I chat to on the podcast who are big on regional areas, and a lot of people confuse regional and mining. You know, a regional centre like Bathurst, for example. I'm not saying that's a great place to invest. Ballarat, Shepparton, all these places.
Both of those places, Bathurst and Ballarat, have universities. So not only does it have the local, farming community around it and the townspeople, but it has university students there as well. Yeah.
Another, like Bendigo, for example, has they manufacture, armoured vehicles and stuff out there. There's plenty happening. Okay, so everything's okay?
Everything's okay.
What should you be worried about then? Right now, because to your point, it's harder. So your 3 points, it's banks stopping lending would really slow down the market considerably. Let's just debunk a myth. Banks don't want to lend money. Banks love lending money, don't they? That's where they make their money.
That's right.
Yeah, banks. So I think a lot of people get confused about they get rejected from a loan application because banks have increased their servicing. They look at your spending differently now. They're assessing your ability to borrow at higher levels. It's a little bit more prudent to how it has been in the past. And a lot of people think that's the banks trying to stop lending to borrowers. That's not the case. The bank is just lending money in line with the recommendations and requirements of the government regulators. The banks love lending money.
They do.
If you can service a loan and you can show yourself to be a good borrower, you'll have banks lining up to give you cash.
You would think so, wouldn't you, Phil?
Yeah.
Well, you asked me what's worrying me at the moment, and you're allowed to make confessions on air?
Absolutely.
Is that right? Okay.
There's a confessions of a property professor. Yeah.
So I'm an optimist. Yep. I generally see the glass half full. Even if it's only a quarter full, I still see it half full. Just early this week, I went into a friend's office and he showed me online on the Fin Review, probably seen that thing about Westpac not wanting investors anymore that have interest-only loans and have LVRs of higher than 80%.
Yep.
And we're actually going to help them to go find another lender. Yeah. Like, that is unprecedented.
Yeah.
And the reason, and I'm not worried for myself so much, but at the minute, daughter number 2, I have 4 children, daughter number 2 wants to get into the property market and she can only afford about 300. So I said to her, look, if we go 50-50, we can buy something for 600 and we're going to find something really good. So I know that I won't have a problem borrowing the money. But I think for my daughter, who would have this is her first investment property, if what Westpac said was going to catch on to other major banks, she would have a problem lending as much as she was able to lend, say, just last week, which means I'm not looking as hard as I was last week for property as I am this week, because I'm thinking there might be an issue with banks lending to investors. But just before I came on air, I was having a chat to your lovely journalist, Sasha, who said to me, Westpac have come out and said, no, that's not right. That's a mistake. Now, I need to do some research and find out what the truth is. But if Westpac, which is Westpac St George, Bank SA and Bank of Melbourne, are going to do that, and then the other banks catch on, then I would be a little bit worried because there is going to be less demand for property. There is no doubt about that. And property prices will soften.
So you're a property economist. Why does property go up in value?
Why does property values go up based on our capacity to pay for it? So if we got an increase in our salary, that would mean that we could borrow more, so we would buy a place that's more expensive. One of the reasons property prices have increased significantly in the last 30 years, because just looking at each other, I know that I'm a lot older than you, Phil. Better looking as well you are, by the way. So, like when we bought our first place back in the 80s, we needed a 25% deposit, right? And interest rates were double digit. So now interest rates are a lot lower, and I only need a 10% deposit. So if I had, $50,000 back in 1984, then I could buy a place that was worth $200,000. Today, with that same 50, I can buy a place that's worth $500,000.
Yeah.
So what do people do? Do they just stick to the $250,000 house and say, no, I'll leave the rest for later? No, they just keep
big as possible.
That's right. And then interest-only loans became flavour of the month. So if your loan is interest-only, your mortgage repayment is not that big, which means you can borrow more. So a lot of these factors, incomes increasing, banks lending a greater percentage, interest rates dropping, they have all led to property values increasing.
And attitude has changed quite a lot as well. So people want, this sort of the now economy, right? People want the best thing they possibly can right now, rather than sort of waiting.
That's right. So, your first, this is the thing that I teach in class, generally at uni, because that's where I have all the young ones. And it's your first home is not necessarily going to be your dream home. Like our first home, because I was teaching out the country, was a 2-bedroom transportable house. Now I live in a lovely home in Adelaide, but I had to step that. So we went from a 2-bedroom place to a slightly bigger place, did 2 renovations, and now I live in a probably not my forever home, because now it's too big. Yeah. We'll move to another place. Whereas young ones, they want their forever place right now. It just, you have to lower your expectations if you want to make money in property.
The thing is, I just don't think that's ever going to happen, right? Because now you've got, obviously, credit card debt is easy to secure. It fluctuates, but it's pretty easy. Any bank will give you a credit card, particularly if you're younger. So you can get what you want now and pay it off later. Now you have things like Afterpay. So, we used to do lay-by, which was, I want that. I remember lay-by. I worked in retail at university. And my job was to keep all the lay-by stuff like organised, right? And it was heaps of, I worked at a toy store, Toys R Us, and not Toys R Us, Well for Kids, sorry. And people would like pay off an item that they wanted for 6 months, right? And then they get it, they pay the last payment, they walk out, they're so happy. Now you've got Afterpay, where you pay off what you've just bought in installments. The world has gone mad, but it's just the way it is, right?
And on a smaller scale, like when I go and buy coffee now and I pull out my wallet to pull out cash, most shop owners are surprised. What, cash? Most people are just handing over card. Doesn't matter what it is. And I mean, I would sincerely hope that they're keeping a record of what they're spending, but I seriously doubt that.
I'll tell you who is keeping a record of what they're spending, and that's the banks.
Yes, they are, aren't they? Now they are.
Absolutely.
Yes.
See, I don't think people understand and appreciate. I try and pay with cash, right?
Yeah.
Particularly if it's at the pub. But the apps, every bank's got an app right now, and they want you to. It's all sort of big data and AI and machine learning, all that sort of stuff, right? So as soon as you say at some point in time that if you allocate this particular cost and you tag it as something, then the machine knows what that is. So over time, it's going to keep showing what it is. So one of the biggest problems in securing debt right now, securing a mortgage, is the fact that you can't fabricate your living expenses anymore because the bank knows what you're doing because everyone's paying with a card. It's very trackable and traceable. Obviously, positive credit reporting is coming in right now, which is good if you pay your bills on time. But this is one of the biggest challenges of people securing finance is the fact that they probably live beyond their means, where once upon a time they could probably, I can't remember the term is, but the banks would just apply a typical, this is what your living expenses would be.
Husband and wife, 2 kids, this is what it is.
Here you go. So it is going to get harder, but I think people who are prudent in their spending, prudent in how they manage debt, don't overextend themselves on stupid debt, as in credit card debt, cars, store cards, holidays, stuff like that. These are the people who the bank's going to be happy to lend to in the future. But we all want the property markets to be stable and predictable, right? Because we're all property investors. So on that basis, 10 years ago, you said here's the top 100 suburbs. How would you score yourself on how well you did that?
All right. So if I was to give myself a grade, it would be an A.
You could give yourself an A.
But not an A+.
Okay.
Because where I bombed out was Perth in Western Australia.
So you thought they were going to do better than what they did?
Yeah. I picked 20 in Perth, 20 suburbs in Perth, and like the mining bust that I talked about before, that had an impact on Perth, in particular lifestyle suburbs, and those lifestyle suburbs are on the coast, in particular places around Mandurah.
Okay.
So I really stuffed it up there. The only suburbs that did well were the ones close to the city. Victoria Park, East Victoria Park, Carlisle, and Morley.
Okay.
But Melbourne, I got 20 out of 20. Sydney, 20 out of 20.
So what science did you use? So people listening is going, all right, Peter, what's your secret? What's the secret? Okay. What's the science behind identifying these suburbs?
Right. So I look for undervalued areas. So I look for a prime area. So let's say I look at the city, all right, because that is a prime area. That's where lots of people want to be. And then I look for suburbs where initially the median price is lower than other surrounding suburbs. And then once I find that the median price is lower, I actually go and have a look. Now, one of the reasons the median price might be lower is because that particular suburb is full of factories. So houses there are cheap because they're surrounded by heavy industrial. But sometimes you go to the suburb and you can see that, well, this suburb looks very similar to the other suburb, but the same house is like $100,000 cheaper. You know, surely that can't go on for long, because as much as people want to live in that prime suburb and they can't afford it, the suburb next door is more affordable and it has similar amenities because you're only next door. All right, might be a little bit further to the shops or a little bit further to the train station, but it is very close. And for me, the other kicker, and one thing that I'm really interested in, is gentrification, where suburbs that nobody wanted to live in the past, and if I go back a long way in Sydney, places like Balmain and Paddington many, many years ago, but now are highly desirable. I've actually written a paper, an academic paper on gentrification, and the keys are the suburbs that gentrify, and this is around the world, but I'm particularly focusing on Australia, need to be close to the city, close to the water. It doesn't have to be the sea, it could be a river, right? But they must have historical or character buildings. So Balmain, Paddington fit that. Surrey Hills is another more recent one. Redfern is another
through right now.
Yeah. And if I look at Melbourne, Richmond is a classic. St Kilda, in Brisbane, West End, in Adelaide, Norwood and Unley. So to answer your question again, basically look for undervalued areas close to the city or the sea. Look at the median price, but then do some finer grain research, because median price, as you would know, Phil, is just the middle price of all the properties that have sold, right? So then I'm comparing apples with apples. Does this 1960s house sell for more than that 1960s house? Is the streetscape very similar? Is the housing style very similar? So in Sydney, Marrickville, I pick as one. Next door to Stanmore. Stanmore is much more expensive, but in particular that area of Marrickville close to Stanmore, you wouldn't know whether you're in Marrickville or Stanmore. So that's the sort of thing that I do. So for mine, selecting suburbs to grow is a science, numbers, but it's also an art. So there's a lot of subjective thinking. So that's why I actually, like all the suburbs that I wrote about in my book, I visited. So I travelled around Australia. I went to all the capital cities of Australia and looked at not just those 107 suburbs, but there are other suburbs that I looked at.
So you got out, you walked around, you checked it out, you drove about.
Yeah, hired a car, walked. In Adelaide, I would maybe go for a run or ride as well, because I think the closer you can get, the better off you are. Because when you're walking or riding, you can hear what type of music is being played. You can smell what sort of cooking is going on in the area, which gives you an idea of the sort of people that live in the area. Look, I was pretty happy with my results. They're not perfect. Perth I really stuffed up.
An A's not bad. If you can live your life with A's and rather than A pluses,
that's right. So look,
right,
I may not get admitted into medicine at university, but I could probably get admitted to law or engineering. So I'd be happy with that.
That's what. So with gentrification, so this process of gentrification, and it's still happening right now. Does gentrification only happen once?
Oh,
because I'm sitting there thinking, once gentrification has happened, does it gentrify again in 100 years' time?
I don't. Australia? Yeah, more Australia.
PhD on that.
Yeah, Australia is too young to do research on that, but overseas, that's a very good point, Phil.
Because as a property investor, you know, there is areas out west, I think, which will gentrify, but they just change.
Yeah.
Paddington, that means everything else needs to improve around Paddington. In 100 years' time, Paddington's a shithole, right?
Yeah.
Now the average price is like $4 million out there,
That's right.
So if we run out of gentrification, what do you do as a property investor?
Well, look, the market in England, or the UK, I should say, and the US, where gentrification is written about most, their housing markets have been going on for centuries.
Yeah.
And gentrification is still occurring. Look, one of the kickers for gentrification was the Industrial Revolution, when people moved from living around factories to, no, hang on, we need some modern town planning, we need to put in mains water, sewerage, we need houses over there, we need industry over there. And what happened was all those workers' cottages where nobody wanted to live before have now become suddenly very popular.
Yeah, that's Balmain. Pretty much,
yeah, that's right.
Balmain. Yeah. And this goes back to your point about how to identify these suburbs. Balmain went through a period of gentrification. I'm going to sort of say, truly, it'd be the late 90s that really kicked into play. Yeah. And that grew rapidly. Early 2000s up to 2010, the property price went nuts. Then Rozelle kicked in a gear, which is next door. Then Rozelle did what Balmain did. Then it kicked in across Victoria Road and Rozelle, then Lilyfield. So Lilyfield's now sort of going through that process of catching up to Rozelle, which is catching up to Balmain. So this keeps spreading out. So as a property investor, you need to understand those dynamics.
That's right.
Data can help you understand that, but it's just not data alone. No. It's the art form.
That's right.
So how do you become a better artist?
Well, it's a lot of reading and research. Yeah. A classic example, you talked about those other suburbs on the harbour. So if we're looking at Sydney again, so I looked at places like Newtown, and then I looked at neighbouring places like Erskineville and Enmore. Yep. And more recent times, I've said it's St. Peter's and Tempe, because it's that ripple effect. So if people want to get educated about, can you give plugs on the show or not?
It depends what it is. I'll let you have a go.
Okay. What about a TAFE course? Is that all right?
Yeah, fine.
Look, you educate yourself. I think people are doing the right thing right now by listening to your show. You are a trusted property commentator,
maybe,
and you bring trusted property experts on your show. There are, as you know, Phil, that's certainly one of the main reason that I'm on Pippa is there are too many sharks out there in the property industry. So, I'm more than happy to come on your podcast because you are a board member of Pippa, so you can be trusted and you are really out there to help people rather than just help yourself.
Yeah.
So people that are listening to this show, continue to listen, and there are other, magazines that you can read. There are plenty of blogs out there, but whatever you read or whatever you hear or whatever you watch, just ask yourself, does this person have a vested interest in saying what they're saying? Are they truly independent? There are a number of courses out there. I run the TAFE course in Adelaide, and for the first time in a long time, we're doing some weekend courses. So for those of you that live interstate, we're doing a Fundamentals of Property Investment in October and a property development workshop in November. But if you go to the TAFE SA website and put in search property, you'll find those dates. Thanks for that plug, Phil.
No worries. We can probably edit that out, right? I'm all about education.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah, look, certainly all of my degrees help me with my research, but I don't know what it is. Like, I grew up in a property family because my father was a real estate agent. So I reckon I was learning about property at the age of 7 or 8 through a process of osmosis, not even knowing it. Yeah.
You love it. So 10 years ago, you did Top 100 Suburbs. Is there a 2018 version of this?
Well, look,
you're working on it right now?
One thing I learnt was I'm not writing another book about the top suburbs, because the year after the book was written, people would look at it and think, oh, this is old. But what people don't understand is suburbs, like you were saying, Balmain, they take years to come good.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm writing the book Top Stocks 2018 and next year there'll probably be a different list.
Yeah.
I would be happy to write reports on the next crop of top suburbs that would update it, but I'm not going to do another 107, mate. That's too much work.
Too much work.
Let's
get you write some of this stuff for us. And
right.
if you want that, let us know, editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au, and we'll get that teed up. But, okay, can you give us something? Let's go quickly around the grounds, the capitals. So we're talking about capitals. I know we've spoken about regional properties and the fundamentals you need to get right regional, but let's leave that for the moment. Let's kick off in your hometown, South Australia, Adelaide. What do you like? Which suburbs do you like there now and why?
So the inner west, because it's going through a gentrification process, just like the inner west of Sydney and the inner west of Melbourne. So names of suburbs include Thebarton, Torrensville, Cowandilla, Hilton, Hindmarsh, West Hindmarsh.
Okay. So go check them out on Google and start looking around those. Okay. Same thing. So in Melbourne? Suburbs.
I like Footscray, West Footscray, Maidstone, Braybrook.
Okay. What sort of median prices are there in those sort of areas? Like, as an investor, what do you need to get in there?
Oh, look.
Are we talking houses, units? Doesn't matter?
Well, ideally houses, but you're far better off buying a unit, a small property in a good location, than a house, a big property in a poor location, because you can never change location. Okay. So for the same money, you're better off, in my opinion, buying a flat or a unit, never an apartment. We're not talking high-rise apartments here, right? So old-style flat or unit, say in West Footscray or St. Peter's in Sydney, than for the same money buying a house a lot further away from the CBD and nowhere near the water.
Okay. All right. Sydney, then you like...
St. Peter's and Tempe.
Okay, so you like that train line that's heading out through there. Yeah, the old sort of Stanmore, Petersham, Erskineville.
It's that ripple effect.
Yeah.
So, Newtown has virtually finished that gentrification process. Erskineville's almost finished it. Then to Enmore, St. Peter's, Tempe.
It's probably a good time to be buying, right? With
I think
Sydney
so.
prices coming down. But you're still in for, to get a 2-bedroom house in Tempe, you're probably in for, what, 800?
That's right.
Yeah. I haven't looked, but I imagine it's around that sort of dollars with work to do, right? Okay. All right. Brizzy. So Brizzy should start firing. I'm hoping.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm hoping for Brisbane. I'm heavy in
Yeah.
Brisbane. I haven't seen a lot happening. So
Adelaide and Brisbane, I think, are the two picks. So in Brisbane, I like Hurston, Kelvin Grove. They're close to the city. Wollongabba is probably my favourite.
Okay.
That's an area that is almost finished that gentrification process, or out on the Redcliffe Peninsula, or just below that, Sandgate and Brighton. So plenty of picks for Brisbane.
Okay. All right. Darwin,
Milner
away.
Creek.
Yeah, okay.
No, Milner and Rapid Creek.
Okay.
Yeah.
And WA then, Perth.
Victoria Park, East Victoria Park, Carlisle. We can't go wrong. They're close to the city. They're close to the river.
Okay, so it's got to be by water, right?
Yeah, well, Australians love water,
yeah.
Especially in Sydney. Look at this beautiful view we have out here, Sydney Harbour.
Not bad.
We love water. And around the world, many Western nations love that. You'll find that properties closer on the water sell for a lot, even though they might be a long way away from other facilities or amenities.
Okay, all right. And I don't want to get beaten up, so the heartbeat of the nation, Tasmania?
Canberra?
No. No, stay well away from Canberra. They don't know what they're doing down there at the moment. So Hobart, what do you reckon?
South Hobart, North Hobart and Glebe.
Okay, and our friends in Canberra then?
Canberra, I would be going for Narrabundah.
Okay, Narrabundah.
But there's two parts to Narrabundah. There's north and south, which is divided by the main road. I can't remember what the name of the road is. But one part is full of low-quality housing. You want to stay away from that part. Okay. And the other one...
Low quality as in built poorly? Or
government housing.
Government housing.
The other one in Canberra is Braddon, very close to Civic, very close to the city centre.
Okay, so do you subscribe to the theory of... let's use Sydney as an example. You're saying it needs to be close to the city, close to the water. When you look at Sydney, the evolution of Sydney, you have satellite cities within Sydney which are bigger than Adelaide. So let's talk about Parramatta.
Yep.
So
the third
Parramatta.
CBD.
Okay, Parramatta, Campbelltown, Liverpool, Blacktown, Hornsby. You know, they're all big cities in their own rights. Does the same thing apply? Like, you know, is that a CBD? So that's a city. So you should be investing close to it.
So when I say the central business district, that goes for even towns.
Okay.
So generally the best place to invest in a town is near the main street. Unless it's a coastal town, then you want to be near the water.
Yeah.
So look, you're right. Like Parramatta, I don't know if Parramatta's got more population than Adelaide, but it is a big area where there is a high concentration of amenities and facilities.
Yeah.
And that's what the CBD has. It's the reason I picked the CBD is because that's where the highest concentration of white-collar jobs are.
Okay.
And it's the white-collar workers that can afford to pay a lot for either rent or to purchase the property. So if you can get close to Sydney, North Sydney, Parramatta, or some of these other hubs, then yes, you use the same methodology. Look for undervalued areas around that prime hub. And then it's not just based on median price, because as I illustrated before, it might be really cheap because it's full of industry or the soil is contaminated. Go and have a look. Drive down the streets. Are the houses similar in the prime suburb as they are in the undervalued suburb? Are the streets similar? When I say, and so far as streets, we're looking for wide tree-lined streets. They're the keys there. And then compare apples with apples. So is this sort of house cheaper in the undervalued suburb than this sort of house in the prime suburb. So if you can tick those boxes, you think, you know what?
Should be right.
And look, here's where the art comes in, right? When you're looking in the suburb, have a look at the people there. What are they wearing? Like, what about the babies? Are the babies being pushed in very expensive pushes by a mum wearing activewear, or a dad, going out for a jog with his Apple iPhone on his sleeve listening to your podcast?
Yes.
Or is it somebody else pushing the pusher?
Yeah. So these are all the clues to look for.
Yeah. And what about the coffees? Do they have soy milk? Do they have coconut milk? Do they have almond milk? Do they have, I don't know, whatever other milks they have? Or is it just basically flat whites and long black steaks?
One of my wife's, one of the key indicators of how a property is gentrifying is how many dog groomers there are on the main street. Like just a little thing like that, she'll always point out and go, oh, wow, there's 3 dog groomers here. There's a bit of money floating around. So this is the art form, right? These are the little bits.
Yeah, these are the little, and it's very hard to put a number on them. Like the cars, are there lots of little BMWs and Audis? That's a good sign. If they're big BMWs and Audis and Mercedes, the area's probably already gentrified. It's already expensive. But if there's lots of old Commodores and Falcons, and that's all you see, then probably not.
Okay, all right. So everything's okay.
Oh, look, mate, I sleep well at night. As far as property's concerned, there is no problem. I'm very confident that the property market will be stable this time next year and the year after.
Okay, and it should go up moving forward.
Nationally, it will.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I've enjoyed that, Peter.
Yeah, me too, Phil. Thank you very much.
Let's do it again. If you like the chat we've had with Peter, it's if you tune into the podcast regularly, you know the way I like to run things. It's we had zero planning. We know each other, so I know Peter knows property. So we didn't actually sit down and say, let's talk about these things. And I like the way it's sort of flowed and run. As I mentioned, Peter, outside of all of his teaching, he chairs the Property Investment Professionals Australia. And I should know it's pippa.asn.au. Is that the website? I think it is.
We should know, shouldn't we? Just Google property investors.
Search Property Investment Professionals Australia. Yeah, and you can see what it does. And fundamentally, Pippa, it's all about just transparency in property transaction in a real simple way. So if you're using a buyer's agent, great. If you don't use a buyer's agent, great. If you use any professional, we encourage you to do so to make sure that they are operating in your best interest. So if there's any fees in property investment, you just need to know where they are, so it helps you make the decision. That's pretty much it, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. We just want greater rigour around that because I guess the bookend or come full circle on my chat, it is the biggest asset class in Australia, and every Australian, irrespective of who you are or what you do, even if you don't own direct property, you are associated with property in some way. Your super fund will be connected with it in some way or another. If you hold bank shares, a lot of the value on a bank's balance sheet is the ability to deliver mortgage financing. So we're all connected, we're all involved, and I think we all have a responsibility to be clear about the direction of Australia as a nation and where property plays within it, and not getting carried away with a lot of stupidity around it, and just having the confidence that with the right prudential regulations from our government, and they're doing a lot of work there, and making sure that people who probably shouldn't afford or shouldn't be investing in property don't invest in property, I think we should be okay. It's very simple.
It is.
Very simple.
You don't need to be a genius to invest in property. You just need to know a little bit more than the other person.
There you go. Yeah. Nice one, Peter. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Phil. Thank you.
And we'll get Peter writing some stuff for us. You can go and check it out, smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. If you're not subscribing to our morning newsletter, so you're the first to know what's going on in property and property investment, smartpropertyinvestment.com.au/subscribe. We're also right across social media. If that's how you like to get your stuff, just search Smart Property HQ. And please keep those reviews coming on iTunes. We do appreciate them. We get a real kick out of getting positive feedback about what we're doing. Our agenda here is just to make sure people can make more informed property investment decisions. So if we're helping you do that, let us know. We'll be back again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.